Hello class, and welcome back to another week, another video lecture. We are in the third week of the summer session. So this week we're going to cover chapters 3 and 4 of the terrorism textbook. 3 and 4 cover the United States, Canada, and Caribbean terrorism trends and information. But before we get too deep into that, I just want to touch on a little bit about last week and some of the things that I saw in the discussion board posts that I want to bring to your attention. Don't forget, I really want to make sure that you don't forget that there are two parts to the reference list. So you've got your reference page, which in the discussion board posts will go underneath. But you also have your in-text citations. Those are just as important as the reference list. And remember, if there is any item in your reference list, there has to be a matching in-text citation, otherwise your reference is not complete. So if you were going to quote me, for instance, and you put quotes around something I said in the body of your discussion board post, sure, you're going to put my name and where that came from, either if I was in writing or from a video like this, you're going to put that in your reference list, but also don't forget the parenthesis up in the narrative in the body of your writing that says, parenthesis, Bell, comma, 2021 or whatever, whoever the author is. If you don't do that, if you just write a quote or you just take information from a source and you don't have an in-text citation, it gives the appearance that you're stealing that material, regardless of the fact that you have a reference list. The reference list doesn't tell me, the reader, or any other reader where that information came from. You just have a list of authors. Specifically, every piece of information that you borrow, for lack of a better word, or any quote that you use, or any information that that isn't your original material, if you don't give the specific author at the time you write it credit, then it gives the appearance that you're stealing that material. So I don't want that to happen. I don't want anybody to get pinched for accidentally taking somebody else's words and not giving them credit. So just remember, if you're going to use somebody else's information, somebody else's words, which you're required to do in this class, not only do you need to mention them in your reference list, you also have to have multiple in-text citations. Every reference has to have an in-text citation someplace in the body. Secondly, it's going to get a little busier this week. We have 2 tests. So because we're covering 2 chapters, there's going to be 2 exams. They're not going to be combined into one. And I wanted to give everybody just a heads up about the way we're scoring in this class. So there are 16 exams in this class over the course of 10 weeks for the summer session. But if you feel as though you didn't do as well as you could have on one of the exams, not to worry. One of those 16 exams, the lowest score of your 16 exams will be thrown out. So only 15 of your 16 exams will count towards your final grade. Don't get too worried. I'm not going to strike those exams until the end of the semester. So if you still see a low grade on your grade book, of course it's going to be there until I find out what the lowest grade is going to be, so I can strike the correct one. So don't worry about that too much. Obviously do as much studying as you can so you can do as well as you can in each exam, but hopefully that takes a little bit of the pressure off. That's all I have as far as housekeeping issues. Let me move into a little bit of material. Let's go over a little bit of that. What I want to talk about is U.S. terrorism and the way people enter the country or make the decision to engage in terror acts. There's really three ways that we're going to talk about today. The first is that folks can enter into the country for the sole purpose of committing a terror act. That doesn't mean they're going to commit that terror act the moment they enter, but the reason they entered the country is to commit a terror act eventually. The second is that folks can immigrate into the United States with good intentions, later become radicalized, and then decide to commit a terror act. And the final way is homegrown terrorists, folks that have lived here their whole life and then become radicalized and again decide to engage in a terror activity. So the first one, entering with the sole purpose of terrorism. A good example of that would be the 9/11 crew. The folks that came over here with the only reason that they came into the country was to commit a terror act, to attack the World Trade Center, the Washington, D.C. And so we through interviews, through the investigation, it was seen that the players in that terror act, the suspects in that terror act, they took flight lessons, they had lengthy, very complicated planning sessions. They knew exactly what they were doing, and they were radicalized before they came into the country. It wasn't like they came here for other other more legitimate activities, although they did engage in more legitimate activities, employment and things like that. But in this case, it appears to be that was a bit of a ruse. So take that and compare it to the next path that we'll discuss, which is folks that come into the country for legitimate reasons. They immigrate with good intentions and then become radicalized and decide to commit some sort of terror act. A good example of that would be the Boston bombers, the brothers, the Sarnev brothers who came from Kyrgyzstan. They immigrated at a young age. They engaged in, they went to school. There was no indication that they came here at a young age with the sole intention of committing some sort of terror act. But while they were here, they started becoming radicalized and realizing that they had some sort of beef with the United States. Specifically, their beef was that they wanted to have retribution or get retribution for all the casualties in the Iraq and Afghanistan wars. So as these ideas began to brew in their head, then through radicalization, they came up with a plan to commit some sort of terror act. In this case, they had a few ideas. One of the ideas they had was they wanted to do a suicide bombing in Times Square in New York. Obviously, they didn't get to that. The next plan they had was the Boston Marathon. They elected to use pressure cookers and kill several people and commit that terror act. So they weren't part of any terror organization. They were just, they had these ideas that brewed this, you're gonna hear that term, you already have heard it several times, radicalization. Make sure you look into that term and you're familiar with that term for the exam and as well as for your discussion board posts. But they were radicalized independently and not necessarily as part of some sort of larger terror cell. Moving on to the third path to terrorism, and that's homegrown. So here in the United States, there are several organizations, several terror cells that are named that are dangerous organizations and have either taken credit for or are suspected of committing terror acts. A good example, or more famous example of a homegrown terrorist would be Timothy McVeigh, the Oklahoma City bomber who bombed the Murrah building. It was a government facility, a large government building, and he, along with a couple of accomplices, bombed that building. So that happened on April 19th, 1995. Coincidentally, right before I joined the military. I joined the military in April 25th of 1995, so just a few days. But that date is important. April 19th, April 20th, that sometimes it falls on a weekend, so I'll say that like that weekend, that series of days are really important because when it comes to terror activities, symbolism is so large. So anniversaries are very big. So not only is that the anniversary of the Oklahoma City bombing, but if we look at those couple days, April 19th, April 20th, we see a pattern that starts to form for those few days. Oklahoma City was after the Waco siege, which the ATF was involved in, and Timothy McVeigh had a beef with the ATF. So the ATF. So the coincidence there is a little hard to ignore. Timothy McVeigh had already stated that he had issue with the way the ATF handled the Waco siege and how many people were killed and the investigation that ensued afterwards. So, using that same day or that same couple days, which the Waco siege actually happened on, or the initiation of the end of that siege happened on April 20th, a few years earlier. Also, in 1999, 4/20, the April 20th, was the Columbine shooting. So you see just a series of large-scale activities where folks are choosing the same date over and over and over. And April 19th, April 20th, you've got Oklahoma City, Waco, Columbine. Not to mention, it's also Hitler's birthday. So there's obviously some sort of connection to those dates. And when it comes to symbolism in terrorism, it's very important to keep that in mind. So those that are in law enforcement or have a goal to enter into law enforcement, keep those dates in mind. Keep your peers aware of those dates in mind, and so that you can be extra vigilant on those types of dates, looking for future activities, because there's been so many past activities on those dates, terror activities on those dates. I would venture to say it's not out of the realm of possibility that future occurrences will happen on those dates. So it's a good idea to be as vigilant as possible. And I share that with you for that reason. touching back on Timothy McVeigh, he was a military veteran. He was a veteran of the Gulf War, and like I said, he was very anti-ATF. He had a beef with ATF and feared that the restrictions that are being placed on weapons, especially firearms, was going to be unconstitutional and violate his rights. And so that was part of his radicalization, and that's what made that kind of spawned the idea where he wanted to reach out and do harm to folks. You know, the Murrah building in Oklahoma City housed the ATF offices, as well as several other offices to include a daycare. So the reach was a little bit of an overreach when it came to his trying to harm government officials. But that's what terror attacks do. They have a real rash effect on society, as we discussed in the last couple of weeks, because the shock effect is what is wanted to get your point across, or to get one's point across. Another example of a homegrown terrorist would be Nidal Hasan. He was a major in the U.S. Army. He was stationed at Fort Hood, and he was radicalized after, I mean, he didn't immigrate here, he was born here. He was radicalized by having connections with Islamic fundamentalist terrorism organizations in the Middle East. So he was in contact via email, which the investigation later proved. Well, let me back up. If you're not familiar with Major Hassan, he committed a mass shooting on the base and shot several soldiers. And then later the investigation revealed that it was due to his radicalization based on his connections and communications with Islamic extremists. One of those being Anwar al-Awlaki, which is a well-known communications person that communicates and radicalizes individuals or organizations, and has been involved in other terror plots. I don't want to talk too much of that because I want to leave a little bit. What I'd like you to do is I'll give you just this little bit. I want to do a little bit of research on Anwar al-Awlaki, and if you can find a way to include that in the current or future discussion board posts, I'd like to see that. So those ideologies that were passed on from the Middle East via email affected Major Hassan's behaviors and eventually led to a individual terror attack, although he was affiliated with the fundamentalists in the Middle East. There was no terror cell here. So that's something to also be aware of. I know we touched on it briefly in the last week, but there are individuals who commit terror acts, and then there are terror cells that will take credit for it. So, and sometimes the line can be a little gray, because in the case of Major Hassan, although he was an individual and not necessarily a member of a terror cell across the globe, he was affiliated with and inspired by a terror cell. So keep that in mind. This week, just I know I already mentioned it, you have a couple exams, so make sure you study for those. The exams are timed, so you have each exam has 20 questions and you have 60 minutes, which is, you know, it's plenty of time if you know the material, and they are open book exams. However, you don't have time to look up every answer if you can't find it. You've only got 3 minutes per question, and that's going to leave you with 0 time at the end for review. But even if you're going to look up every answer, you only have 3 minutes to look up every answer. So I recommend reading the chapters, understanding the material before you start the exam. If you have any questions, again, reach out to me. The contact information is on Blackboard, and you can always email me or call me. I look forward to finishing up reading the discussion post from last week. And as you enter your initial post this week, again, a reminder, the initial post is due on Monday. If you don't post an initial post on Monday, there's a 10% penalty for a late submission. So don't hurt yourself. There's only 10 weeks. So having a 10% penalty several times is going to definitely have an adverse effect on your final grade. So make sure you post by Monday, your initial post. And at the time of this recording, that will be just a couple days from now. And then your replies, your 2 replies, which have to be 150 words, are due on Friday. So if you don't match the criteria or meet the criteria for any of those things, or the parameters for any of those assignments, there is a penalty. So if you don't have replies that meet the 150 word requirement, or your initial post is less than 300 words, or is posted later than Monday, all those are going to lead to point deductions. And those are just easy points for you to salvage and not lose. If you're losing points for little things like that, you're hurting yourself in a way that isn't necessary. Focus on doing the easy things, and then the content will fall into place. So again, if you have any questions, give me a call. I look forward to hearing from you if you have anything you need to discuss. And until then, we'll see you shortly.